Welcome to MANstream Media, a place where you get the news and the issues from a male-friendly perspective. And tonight we've got with us Warren Farrell out in Mill Valley, California. Warren, good to see you.
It's really always good to be with you and Paul.
Indeed. And we've got Paul Elam in Houston, Texas. Paul, how you doing?
I am in Houston, Texas. How could I be doing any better?
All right.
Well,
Oh, and it says the guy from California, of course.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. We've got East Coast, West Coast, and the Middle Coast. So
that's right.
Yeah,
we've
and the
got
Gulf
a nice
Coast.
balance here.
East Coast, West Coast, and Gulf Coast.
I just got in from hugging my trees.
And I just got through killing one.
One of those Texans. Anyway,
Well, I had to kill something. It's Thursday.
what can you say? Tonight we're going to talk about the White House Council for Boys and Men, or at least a proposal for that. About 5 years ago, Warren Farrell pulled together a group of people. They were clinicians and academics and researchers, and it was almost 30 or 35 people from all over the country, men and women, who were experts on boys and men. And he got them to write a proposal about the boys and men of what we need and really the crisis that we're going through right now, even though no one sees diddly. And it's if you want to see that particular proposal, you can go to whitehouseboysmen.org and have a good look at it. It's a really nice piece of work. At any rate, there have been some interesting developments since then over this last 5 years. And of course, if you don't know, the White House created a White House Council for Girls and Women in 2009. And all kinds of organizations came together to say, yes, this is just what we need. And those same organizations now, if you go to them and say, how about one for boys, what happens? Nobody does anything. So we've been struggling really in just even getting the word out that this is happening. And it's true with most men's issues. There's very, very little interest in taking part and making sure that something happens that's good for boys and men. At any rate, let's talk with Warren about what's been happening recently, because it's kind of interesting news. So Warren, where can you take us?
We're talking about boys and men? Oh, all right.
Okay. Oh, Warren, say it isn't so.
I too want to be in denial. Yeah, the whole thing started when I got a call from the White House, because I had been on the board of NOW in New York City, and they found that out and said, you want to be part of the White House, you want to be on an advisory board for the White House Council on Women and Girls. And I said, yeah, great, but there also needs to be this White House Council on Boys and Men. And then we did what Tom mentioned, and Tom said but Tom was a key part of the whole process of creating this proposal, and is the creator of the website and just done a phenomenal job, in my opinion, with the website for the White House Council on Boys and Men. But the big question was, if you care about the family, do you care about the family? And the answer from the White House was yes. And do you know that the family also includes boys and men? Well, yes, but boys and men sort of like they have it made, don't they? And the answer was, well, no. And and it's not only in the United States, but in all 72 industrialized countries that the United Nations surveyed that you belong to as part of the United Nations found that boys are doing worse than girls, considerably worse than girls in almost all academic topics, but especially in reading and writing. And reading and writing is what leads to the greatest amount of problems if you don't have mastery of it, and the greatest amount of success if you do. So that was just one indicator. And then the next issue was, well, what's the problem? And when you dissect the problem, if you go into a relatively wealthy neighborhood and you look at a family that does not have a father, the boys and girls do is about the same or a little bit worse, depending on the subject matter, in that home that is wealthy, good school, children without a father, than children do if you go into a home in a poor community with a boy with a father. Now, relatively frequently, when a boy has a father and a mother together, they won't be in a poor community very long, because part of what happens is the boys do well and the fathers tend to do well, and that intact family where both the father and the mother are working to raise the children tends to do much better. But the real division we found was not between rich and poor, but the division between dad rich and dad poor. When there was richness of fatherhood in the family, the entire family did well. When there was a poverty of fatherlessness of father in the family, then the family did poorly. And so we wanted to get this across, and the Boy Scouts endorsed our proposal, and they had a State of the Nation meeting with the White House, and it was all scheduled. And 5 minutes before they went into the Oval Office, I think it was Valerie Jarrett, we are told, crossed the White House Council on Boys and Men off the agenda. And so we were told it was just the wrong time to bring it up. But 5 years afterwards, we kept calling, and there were no responses to our calls. And finally, we got the hint and realized this was never going to happen in this White House. And so we started working with Congress. And then we also realized that there are other presidential possibilities after Obama will only be in office for another less than 2 years. And so we wanted to make contact with all the people who had the possibility of replacing Obama. And even if they only had a minimal possibility of replacing Obama, so for example, there were a presidential candidate who was unlikely to win, if we could get a presidential candidate likely to win or not, to articulate the need, the fact that there was a boy crisis and that there is a need for a White House Council on Boys and Men to the degree that there's a need for a White House Council on Women and Girls, that whether or not the White House Council on Boys and Men was actually occurred, the underlying political base would begin to change. Change only happens when people feel differently. We have that cultural yawn that I just did it as a joke at the beginning of this, as I was introduced here. We have that cultural yawn toward boys and men's issues. It's the cultural yawn that needs to be shaken up and move into a cultural focus on there is a crisis occurring with boys and men. It's occurring in every class with every color of boy. It occurs differently with different classes and different colors. Caucasian males tend to do it in terms of withdrawing, committing suicide. They commit suicide more than boys of color. Boys who are Caucasian are more likely to be the ones to shoot up schools. So we manifest our withdrawal, our problems in different types of ways. We might be video game addicted as much as any boy of color. And so those are just different ways of manifesting our withdrawal, our moving into the digital trenches, because we find that outside of the digital trenches, the world is not very boy-friendly. The world doesn't show us much sense of purpose. And boys without a sense of purpose and a sense of mission start getting different heroes with which we identify. And so we started to talk to, so we then decided that if the presidential candidates could potentially bring this issue to the forefront, even if they were not going to be likely to win, but they brought it up even as a trial balloon, that the press would begin to have to pay attention to that. And it was a good story. When the press pays attention to that, it becomes an issue that begins to be circulating. Is there a crisis with boys? If so, what and why? Do we know about it already? Is there parts of it that we don't know about it? What's the mental health parts of it? What's the physical health parts of it? What's the jobs part of it? What's the fatherlessness part of it? How is it manifesting in education? And so what are the solutions? Are the solutions the government? Are the solutions the family? Are the solutions fathers? Are the solutions better schools? Schools that focus on boys' issues? Is the solution mental health? Is the solution better communication? Is the solution a focus on physical health? All of these are possibilities. And so whether one believes in government or not, the question is not government. The question is the exploration. The setting up of the White House Council on Boys and Men as the issue is the excuse to explore, the vehicle by which we bring it to the public's attention. And so it's part of the strategy of making us aware that there is a crisis, just like there was multiple strategies for making the culture aware that girls had a role that was too limiting in the 50s, and that role needed to be expanded. We now realize that nobody did that expansion of roles for men, so we have two things that are a problem in the culture. We have an era of multi-option women and an era of no-option men, and we also have an era in which the women, unfortunately, framed the debate as if there were oppressors and oppressed, and we were put into the oppressor role, and so for 45, 50 years, we've been in that oppressor role, and so people increasingly withdraw from a sense of compassion for anybody that they perceive to be the oppressor. And so what we need to do is to reframe that debate and help people realize that the issue was not about patriarchy, the issue was about survival. And with survival as the primary focus, both our fathers and our mothers sacrificed their lives to make their children's lives better than their lives. And when the culture understands that, then it's possible to begin to have empathy for the problems that boys and men have, and that's where we want to bring the culture to, so that the men withdrawing, men going their own way, that becomes an option, not a pressure on the part of the culture to give no option but that in order to be safe in the world.
Yeah, I agree, Warren. One thing I would add is that for boys today, they're not only mistreated in some ways, but they're also carrying the cultural shadow. And by that I mean that when a culture has things that they won't deal with themselves, they throw it off onto some group. And boys and men are the group that's catching that shadow today, and it leaves us feeling heavy and judged and crappy. And if you look back just 50 years ago, it was blacks who received this cultural shadow. Blacks are this, blacks are that. Now it's turned to men. And so a part of why boys and men are not doing well is because we're carrying this cultural shadow of this whole idea of, that men are the problem, which is insane. It's just insane.
And men, and this has sort of been, we used to call it a battle of the sexes, and it's really now a war in which only one sex has shown up, and boys and men have put their heads in the sand and hoped the bullets would miss. And then we've started to be doing what might be called a sexodus. We've exited from the world in a dozen different ways. We are afraid to get married. We're afraid to have children. We're afraid to date because we sense, accurately so, that the world is not completely safe for that.
Indeed.
And some boys, young boys, sense this, especially as they start to begin to be expected. They get the message that sex is dirty. That is, the parents are fine about them watching CSI, which is murder and blood, but as soon as two people have their naked bodies on the screen, it's suddenly like their parents go, "My goodness, that's pornography, that's dirty, that's terrible," and the boy learns, "Well, gee, I'm interested in that." And I'm interested in what's dirty and what girls want that I do want, and that begins to develop shame. And the shame begins to make the boy feel better about privately withdrawing into video porn or withdrawing into video games, and he hides in the digital trenches of his life. And these digital trenches are an option, and we're glad they're there, but they should not be something that our sons and our men are forced into because of shame.
Yeah. Were you going to say something about Iowa and what's happened recently?
Oh yeah. So in Iowa, we had this phenomenal. You get off.
I've been planning this for for a couple months now. This Iowa thing. So this is not something just popped up. It's taken a lot of planning and a lot of effort to execute it right.
It really has. And the thinking was, how can we get to the next president? And there were two types of ways. One was in the primaries, but if you wait too long in the primaries, there's increasing levels of bureaucracy between you and any presidential candidate. And so we figured out that there was a faith and freedom coalition out in Iowa that if we sent a group of us out there, we could potentially access the candidates. And so we did all sorts of strategies and role playing and practice body blocking to be able to get our people in there. And so, long story short, with the help of Steve Brule, the videographer, and his press pass and his figuring out that the candidates had to be somewhere, originally we planned to go out there and meet them during the reception, but the reception with 9 candidates expected to show up, none of the candidates showed up because there was a huge traffic jam, and so our entire plan to meet the presidential candidates sort of evaporated before our eyes, and so suddenly we're in there listening to the candidates, and we figure, especially Steve Brule, to his credit, figured, well, the candidates have to be somewhere before they're on stage, and they have to go somewhere afterwards. So he sort of figured out a way past the security guards and got into it because he had the press pass, and got 3 of us into interview every single one of the candidates except for Marco Rubio, who had to catch a plane, but everybody else we had a chance to interview and get and talk about, how do you feel about fatherlessness? Is it destroying the family? And almost to a candidate, they agreed that it was. So we realized we had an issue here that was a common issue between the Republicans and the Democrats. Hillary Clinton has identified 4 issues on which she's going to focus. One of them is strengthening the family. Now, we know that Hillary is also very focused on women and girls, and has oftentimes been unresponsive to boys' and men's issues, or blind to them to begin with. But if she is outwardly saying she wants to strengthen the family, she's going to be in an awfully tight box if she does not acknowledge the value of the fathers in the family. And so we're approaching the Hillary Clinton campaign through Jennifer Granholm, who's on our committee, but then we approach the Republican presidential candidates in Iowa by finding the exit that they were going out, and then jumping past CNN and the New York Times to interview them, and making that interview contact with them, and inviting them to Ames, Iowa in July, when we're asking them to do a listening session where they listen to experts and boys and mentors and people who have boys programs, and they, the presidential candidates of both parties, get an experience of what it's like, why there is a boy crisis and how it exists. Then the presidential candidates will have a chance to sort of cross-examine and interview back the people who are presenting the problems that boys are going through. And then there'll be a chance for the audience to interact with the presidential candidates. So it'll be a very unique listening, audience participation, interactive session with the presidential candidates. And what's in it for the presidential candidates is they'll have an opportunity on their campaign trail to say, before I speak, I listen. And of course, that's a revolutionary idea for many people. But it's, I think, from talking to the campaign staff, they were really intrigued by this type of interactive opportunity, because so many of the presidential candidates get bored sick by saying the same campaign speech time after time, and they're all extremely bright people, able to sort of be quite flexible on their feet. And so that's part of the joy that they get, is to have that type of chance for flexibility, and to have it early enough in the cycle so that if they screw up, it's not hurting them in any significant way. This is a 6-week period where there's a lot of opportunity for what is called in politics a trial balloon, where you say something that you're experimenting with, and it either really collapses and then you just forget about it, and because your press coverage is minimal at this point, you don't take a big hit on it. But if it seems to have some traction, then you begin to hone it in such a way that you make it potentially an issue of the campaign. And that's the opportunity we're giving, presenting, and encouraging the candidates to do.
Yeah, the thing that I just love is the idea that after each candidate talked, in order to get to the exit, they had to go through a camera and Warren, and I think Molly was there also.
Yes.
And so here they are on camera. Warren's asking them questions about men's issues to these presidential candidates. It's like and it's on tape, so we've got videos coming out, right, Warren?
Yes, exactly.
So it'll be interesting to hear what these people say when they're confronted and cornered, And that's the question right there. Nobody else barging in. No way to get away. So
Yes.
it should be interesting to see what the tapes say.
Absolutely. It was really fun. I have to say, this is, a little fun thing on the side. It was fun having the New York Times and CNN there and being able to beat ourselves to get to the candidates before they did. And it was,
Yeah, right.
it was just one of those experiences like doing well in a video game.
Level 27. Paul, you've been real quiet, buddy. What's going on?
Oh, I've just been sitting here yawning.
Practicing the cultural yawn.
And I'm getting really good at it.
Oh, thanks a lot.
This is a no, I was yawning because Tom was boring. Tom's not boring. Neither one of you are. No, this is a really, I mean, and I'm sort of, I've got to do a little bit of self-disclosure here. I mean, one of the things is that recently Tom and Warren and I have had a lengthy discussion about this subject and talked about it in terms relative to what's happening with the men's movement to borrow from Warren, in the digital trenches, which is where I live and work. And here's the deal. I mean, this is one. Another matter of self-disclosure is that politically, my political leanings are pretty much libertarian, and so that means I don't want the government to even try to fix my lawnmower, much less anything else. So, but here comes the question, though, because this is like really key stuff. So why would I, as somebody who believes in ultra-small government and no government interference and no bureaucracies that cost millions of dollars a year that they waste, or billions sometimes that they throw away on garbage, why would I support an effort like this? And I'll tell you why that I do, and why I do without reservation, is because this is about a lot more than politics. I think Warren articulated a lot of that in what he was saying. This is about a cultural narrative, and it is about, for lack of a better word, it's a marketing campaign. And that, I know that puts it in rather cold clinical terms, but one of the things that we know about advertising is that you have to get repetition. You have to hit people, especially when you're talking about a message that people, Warren in one of his interviews there, and I love the term, somebody asked him about a war on men. He said it was more like a cultural shrug. And in order to get past that, you have to hammer a message at people over and over again until some lights start going. And to have Steve Brule down there, who, by the way, sent me one of those videos today. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but I will be this evening. And I know what kind of work he does, and these people that are involved are doing great stuff. But what they accomplished up there in terms of getting a message out was, this is, I believe, the first time in United States history that presidential candidates have been cornered and forced to start answering questions of this nature. Does that mean that they're going to go to Washington and fix all this? No, I don't believe that for a minute.
Exactly.
But the fact of the matter is that with Steve Brule's help and Warren's expertise and all the people he has on his team, they created a message out of the event itself. Regardless of where this goes from here, we have finally Warren Farrell asking the right questions to some people that need to have some answers, and that's an icebreaker. That is it is a sort of a watershed moment that can be built upon in the future. And again, I'm not talking about this in terms of big government. I'm talking about this in terms of changing the cultural narrative. That if you break the taboo about asking about boys and men, and I think it was particularly brilliant to ask the candidates if they were supportive of families, because once you lead them in, who's going to say they're not supportive of families? And nobody that wants a political career is going to say that. And so this is a process of actually cornering them into having to answer, because aren't boys and men part of the family? And the people start getting weird the minute you say that.
Yeah.
And the cognitive dissonance starts kicking in.
Yeah.
And so they have to pick a direction to go. It's fight or flight time for them. And this is a part of that process. It's like the conferences we have. It's like all the articles that we do, the activism we do, all of this, and people can see it now. There is no hiding the fact anymore from the public that there's a lot of people concerned about boys and men's issues. And so while I'm not a big government person, I don't believe in government bureaucracies, I do believe in the men's movement being critical to the future of our society, and how important it is to have people in those very spots, in a primary area, in people's faces, trapping them and saying, hey, you have to answer these questions. We're not going to, we're just not going to let everybody ignore these issues anymore. And so I think this was a huge score. It was a wonderful job that you guys did. Now, to address the political side of it, which I think in fairness, we have to talk about that, about political realities on the ground and what our expectations are. I see this more, again, as a, for lack of a better word, propaganda that is very effective at reaching people out there, seeing people like Mike Huckabee and stuff like that need to answer these questions, and apparently, from what I heard, doing quite well at it in some ways, getting this stuff on the record. But here's a deal. The government itself, we still have the core problem, is that we've got a right wing and a left wing, and we're ever more polarized politically. I mean, the left is going way left, the right's going way right, and they're both signing on to the same legislation, often the same sexist, bigoted, misandric legislation that gets votes from the general public, because we still live in a culture that is conditioned to blame men. So it's like, pick a party, either one of them is going to ultimately screw it up. That's just a personal opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody but myself here. But eventually, the women's vote is going to come in. But there is an element of hope that I see here about this that I honestly have not seen before. Not that I don't have hope for government at all, but hope in terms of what government might be forced to do. Because the cultural narrative is changing, and because people are now, you can't go to any, let's say, even extreme white wing telling young men they need to man up and find a wife. You will find the comments, and they're flooded with people saying, no thank you, this is BS, I'm not buying this, I'm not your mule, I'm not going to do it. And the same thing on the left, when they're saying, because what I guarantee you, part of my audience, what they will do is they'll predict to say, yeah, Hillary says that she's going to work to strengthen the family. And then once she's elected, she will say, I'm going to work on strengthening the family, and the best way to do that is to create more opportunities for girls and women.
Yes, exactly.
And that will happen, folks.
Yes.
I mean, there's no doubt about it. Hillary was the one that said women suffered more from war than men do. So,
the real victims.
Yeah, the real victims of war.
Yeah.
But I don't have a vendetta against any of these people. They're politicians. We know what they're like and what they do. I mean, it's no big deal. That's what it takes. People vote for faces and sound bites and things like that, and that's just the nature of the culture that we live in. So my approach to this is go for it, hit it, keep hitting it, keep doing this, and other efforts are underway to take things in maybe on a different track, but they're parallel tracks doing the same thing. And so it's real important that both of these approaches continue to grow. I got to say, congratulations, Warren. That was like a shot from half court that was all net. It really was, comparatively speaking, because It wasn't too long ago that you were just getting crossed off the list.
Mhm.
And this is a different world we are beginning to live in, and it will eventually reach a tipping point, and these are the kind of things that build that kind of momentum.
I
That's what I
agree.
think.
What are the examples of that? Tom, did you want to say something before I?
No, no, you go ahead, Warren.
You sure? One of the examples of that was, and I don't know whether this is actually a cause or not, but uh, the first person I had a chance to make contact with was Rand Paul. He was the only one I had a chance to speak with before he went on stage, and frankly, I was very impressed with him. Very bright guy and very creative, and he listens well. And so we talked about fatherlessness and the importance of it, and how crucial fathers were. And he went on stage and he gave a spontaneous rap, and then he got on to the importance of fatherlessness. Now I don't know whether that was part of his rap as planned. I haven't kept track of his off the cuff raps, but it's maybe it was and maybe it wasn't. But if it had anything to do with if it was part of one of his 30 or 40 options that he drew from, and he brought that forward as a result of a little stimulus just before his talk, that's one of the types of ways that we can have impact when you bring issues to cultural attention. You've taken the first step, and you've won the first battle in the war of cultural change. Let me deal with the issue for a moment, if I may, Paul, on the issue of small government. And I think one of the reasons that many of us are opposed to government is because we have seen it be so dysfunctional on such a massive level so often. And so we have the Women, Infants, and Children program. And what do? They help women when the women are not married to men. But yet we know that children do much better when the father is involved, and the best single way of getting the father involved is when the father is married to the woman. Because when the father isn't married to the woman, and I don't have a big thing on marriage or not, if two people don't have children, I have zero issues on marriage, but we know the data shows really clearly that one of three things happen when there's not marriage, and that is that the father is minimally involved, not at all involved, gets involved with some other family or some other thing, or is hierarchically involved. That is, he's involved as a father when the mother believes that the father can potentially father in the way the mother believes the father can father. So this hierarchical involvement makes the father feel like a babysitter, and he eventually withdraws because he's not equally valued. He's condescended to. What his contributions are, like roughhousing, like encouraging children to ask why, of like doing projects with them, like going off into the wilderness and hiking and playing. Those types of things that Tom Golden so articulately talks about how men grow. Those are the things that mothers oftentimes don't understand the value of, and do not get articulated. So when there's the government doing what I call dysfunctional government, like Women, Infants, and Children, or spending not millions but billions of dollars on the Violence Against Women Act, when the data clearly shows us that men and women in domestic situations have about equal experiences of violence, and there's all these women's shelters, and the only men's shelter is called a prison, and so we have these billions of governmental dollars that may or may not be able to be functional if they were spent functionally, but they aren't being spent close to functionally. So it's our job, by calling the boy crisis issue into attention, is to say, wait a minute, boys have issues also. If boys don't see their father being responsible, involved, caring, connected, what does that boy have to look forward to? If this is an era of the end of men, boys, that's not a future boys can really be joyful and anticipating, and that's what makes boys withdraw. So the single biggest way to limit the size of government is to strengthen the family, because the entire spending of the health and human services is now a huge amount of it, unemployment, food stamps. These are being spent on programs that are occurring because when fathers aren't involved, there is a need for unemployment. There are trillions of dollars a year being spent on prisons. prisons are basically centers for men without fathers. So you bring fathers into the family, you save trillions of dollars in the prison population, and you decrease the expenditures and the size of government enormously just from prisons alone. And so that's an example of how it's so important not just to sort of to say no government, but to say government misappropriated creates a need for a bigger government to make more problems than it solves. Government properly used can reduce the size of government in its present form by strengthening the family and strengthening father involvement, among other things that it can do, like strengthening support for communication, strengthening support for vocational schools in schools, allowing people to have choices in schools like charter schools and discover which ones work best for boys. Those types of solutions can be government supported in order to reduce the size of government. And so every good businessman, every good Republican who's a businessman knows that sometimes, even if you have an austerity plan, you have to invest something if you want to, if you want to invest in some little company called Apple Computers, you might want to spend a few $100,000 there 20 years ago in order to have a few $100 million there today.
Yeah, really.
Well, that's very well stated. I agree with you. I think the idea of I'm not sure that I'm sold on the idea that government appropriated correctly is achievable.
Yeah, you've almost never seen an example of it. I can understand why.
Why is it not achievable?
Well,
why do you think it's not achievable?
Well, because there is a financial interest by government and in industry in having things the way they are. They have coined the term now, prison industrial complex. United States has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's inmates, most of which, of course, are men. It is a privatized deal now where there's huge money changing hands on this, and these are people that get entrenched in government and lobby groups. I know, for instance, this is semi-related in that most drug arrests are men, but efforts to legalize cannabis, which have passed in Colorado and in Washington, face their biggest opponents. I read an article the other day. It was the prison workers union in North Carolina that lobbied to defeat a bill that would have encouraged, or that would allow at least medical marijuana. There is investment in keeping drugs illegal so they can arrest fatherless men
and have jails
who are more prone to use drugs and throw them in jail.
More jails, more jobs.
There is huge amount of jobs out of VAWA. The distribution of funds out of that, and in particular the lack of accountability of those funds, is so egregious that people should be going to prison. We should have some prison beds for some people that are distributing money through the Violence Against Women Act, and Congress refuses to hold any of that accountable. The discrepancies in fundings and how money is spent and who it goes to is the biggest mess in the world, and everybody's putting on their blinders and looking the other way. There is an investment also in forcing a society in which you have, instead of one taxpayer in a home, you've got two taxpayers. As long as you can. And what they did, in my opinion, I'll get into. I've got my aluminum foil hat here, and I'll put it on in a minute. If I keep talking, I'll have to take off my headset and put it on. But I find it interesting that the way that feminism, the way that culture evolved, also coincidentally involved lowering household income while forcing more people into the workforce and collecting more tax money to create more bureaucracies that make money off of this problem. And again, Warren was right. 1950s America, I mean, maybe great for its time, but we came to a place technologically and culturally where it was time to change, where it was time to say that human beings need to have choices, that we can't just look at a woman and say, your job is to get married and have a baby and to stay in the kitchen and don't have an opinion on too much. Not that the opinion stuff didn't happen as much as people think, because women have always had influence in government and in family, big time influence. I think I saw a movie once where the woman said, yes, he's the head of the family, but I'm the neck, and the neck can turn the head any way it wants to. And that has always been the source of women's power in culture. So it's been there, but it was still the appropriate thing to do to create an equal opportunity for people to choose their path in life, which was not quite the case before. But we have to remember that it wasn't the case for men either.
Yes.
Men were assigned roles, and they were told, you have to do this. So we've gone from nuclear families with mothers and fathers, a relatively acceptable divorce rate, with the ability for one person in the household to raise a family, take care of children, put a roof over their head, feed them, and clothe them. And now we have to have both people in families working. The children are abandoned by both parents, or they're not abandoned, but you know what I mean. They're separated from both parents during the day because the parents have to have that income to make ends meet, and we've seen bureaucracies explode during this time. So I'm not going to use the conspiracy word, because I don't think it is a conspiracy. I think it is a evolutional glitch socially that happened, but it's caused a lot of damage.
Yes.
And it's still the only answer to this, ultimately, is that we must force the society to accept that compassion and choice for men is something that matters too.
Yes.
Yes.
But I see this whole thing as about money and business.
And I would add one thing onto that, Paul, and that is that it's about gynocentrism.
Yes.
You know,
Well, that's how you sell it.
The thing that makes it so easy for the Women, Infants, and Children program is that it's taking care of women. And it's like that's gynocentric. That's burned into our psyche that we're supposed to take care of women. And there is nothing burned in that says you're supposed to take care of men. Nothing.
Well, the opposite is burned in because
exactly. They're expendable.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. That's it.
No, Tom, you go.
I got something I'd like to add to that, if you don't mind.
Ahead.
I wrote an article 2 years ago. I called it the N%, and started looking just at sort of the percentages of personality disorders that affect our court system and things like that, and examined some of the concepts that I was just talking about the last time I started running my mouth. But what I came down to was the realization during the course of writing that is that we live, human beings, and I mean planet-wide. If you tell a society that something you want to do benefits women, then the society will go for it whether it actually benefits them or not.
Yes.
And society will turn on anybody that, even if it harms women in the long run, society will turn on you if they have the perception that it supports women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And men will turn on each other, and women will turn on each other to make sure that the focus stays on women. And you can sell any law you want to this culture by putting it in pigtails. That you
exactly.
put any, yes, you put any problem and give it a pink color, and people will buy it, and they will absolutely demonize you if you oppose it. I mean, we can sit here and talk about VAWA all day long. It's one of the most corrupt pieces of legislation that has ever happened in United States history since slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It is that corrupt. It's that bad. And if you say, look at all the waste, they're just throwing the money away. There's no accountability. They ignore men. They ignore the men's children. Men who have a choice between leaving their children with an abusive mother and having nowhere else to go, you can tell society that all day long, and somebody steps up and says, well, wait a minute, we're taking care of women, the discussion is over. And it is, human beings are so easy to sell this to, it's a shame, which is why, part of why, that I don't have a whole lot of hope for political solutions, but because I think what happens in society is that cultural narratives change and then translate into political solutions. I think we saw a great example of that from the 60s.
Yes, I think there can be an interactive effect. I think one of the things that's happened in the last, 45, 50 years is, as I was saying before, is that women articulated the feminists articulated the oppressed oppressor mentality of women being the oppressed, and there was sort of, as we said, there was the battle of the sexes began to morph into a war in which only one side showed up. And the result of our not being political, the result of our saying, no, this is not an oppressor dichotomy. This is, our dads went to work early in the morning. Our dads went to war and died, so you could not have to speak German under Hitler. Our Chinese fathers died building the railroads. We love women. We have died for you. To call us the oppressor is a tragedy. By not saying that, by not speaking up, we allowed the dysfunctional, feminized government, the government as substitute husband, to protect women in mass and unquestioned. We have to start questioning that, and if we can question it in ways like confronting the presidential candidates directly or inviting them to listen to us at a point in time when they don't take a big hit by listening to us, those types of opportunities to get the ears of people whose ears have not been gotten by our putting our heads in the sand. If we continue to put the heads in the sand, the outcome is 100% predictable. The government as a substitute husband will expand and expand. The family will weaken and weaken, and the price that we pay will be in the education falling farther and farther behind, men's mental health getting worse and worse, men's physical health getting worse, men not being able to prepare for jobs, men having no hope in life, no sense of purpose. That's what the alternative is, and that's why it's really crucial for us to speak up rather than continue what we've done for the last 35 to 50 years, which is put our heads in the sand and hope the bullets will miss.
Yes, and I would add on to that, Warren, that it's not only men who've put their heads in the sand, it's women too.
Yes.
Women have not spoken up about this, just as we men have not spoken up. So we need to hold both men and women accountable for this, not just the guys. At least that's my way of looking at it.
Yeah, tell us more about that part of that, Tom.
Well, it's the whole gynocentric thing. I mean, it's easy to hold men accountable for everything. Well, the guys didn't stand up. They weren't the one to kick ass and say no. But look, the women didn't stand up and say, look, I'm getting too much here. This is not balanced. This is not fair. So we got to hold both accountable. And the cultural meme, the cultural push is to only hold the men accountable. We got to hold both accountable. If we're going to be equal, then, you got to say, okay, you screwed up too. You women out there, you didn't stand up and say anything. Don't just point at the men and say if the men didn't do it,
Very good, Tom. Let me give an example I think that will reinforce that. When we didn't have the women voting, the suffragists didn't say it's our responsibility for us as women to speak up. They blamed men for not allowing women to vote. Now, blaming is not great, but the point there is that the women were holding the men accountable, and now I'm holding the men accountable, and yet when the situation was reversed, women held men accountable so that no matter who is losing out, both sexes are holding men accountable.
Yes.
So it is true. Women are 7 million more women vote on the presidential elections as men do. Whatever women want during presidential elections can happen, and it took men and male Congress people and senators to support women voting. and now we are asking women to speak up and to support their sons having lives that will be productive, that will have a sense of purpose, that will not encourage your son to withdraw because he doesn't know what's going on, but he just doesn't know. He just knows it's not working for him. If you're a mom, if you're a teacher, you've seen this in your classroom, in your home, and it is time, as really, second your emotion, Tom, about it is time for women to speak up, because the truth is that no one is paid attention to better, as Paul was just saying, than women saying what they need and want. And we need you to speak up. It's one of the reasons we asked Molly Olson to come, and she's so well articulated and said, this is I'm a mother. I have many children. I want parenting to be shared by both mother and father. The woman needs the male support. Children need the male support. And when it comes from a woman like Molly Olson, who went out to Iowa with us and spoke to these presidential candidates, it makes it much easier to hear.
Yes, and we do have women speaking up. I mean, we've got Allison Tiemann, we've got Karen Strong, we've got Susie McCarley, we've got lots of women who are speaking up and saying what they think, and this is a good thing. It's a great thing.
Absolutely.
That is, I think, the key is one of the mistakes I think that was made in the past. Some of the efforts, not near all of them, but in some of the earlier, people don't know, men have actually had a human rights movement of their own for 100 years. You can go to A Voice for Men and read Setting the Record Straight. You can search the site for that, and it will give you the 100-year history of all these attempts. And one of the biggest mistakes, and I think what's changing now, is that the men did not include women. There was an automatic assumption, and there still is today. When at last year's conference, when I was in Detroit and I was talking to somebody from Time magazine and on the phone, and she asked me, do we have women supporters? And I said, no, we absolutely do not. We have activists that happen to be female. We don't look for supporters in women. They're not assistants in this thing.
Yeah, good.
They are activists. And, and when people treat them like that as equals, it's amazing how many of them will start stepping up and talking, and because there's a lot of women that feel this. There is, I guarantee you, millions of second wives in this country that know exactly how screwed up our courts are, our family courts.
Yep.
Millions of them.
Yep.
And it's important to reach these women and let them know that their unified voice could be the most powerful thing in the world for changing their own lives and for changing the lives of their sons and their daughters, because ultimately this is about everybody winning. I used to, when I first started A Voice for Men, I had a big banner on the top of it that said, what if they had a gender war and men showed up? And
I remember that.
Yeah, and I took it down after a while because I don't see this really as a gender war. I'm not at war with women. As a matter of fact, I probably have more conflict with men than I do with women. I agree with what you said, Tom, but to be honest, I see a really big problem in men in this culture.
It's a big problem with both.
Yeah, it is. It's across the board, but I think where you really have both hit it on the head here is we have our problem in this culture right now more than anything else is cultural ignorance about gynocentrism. The culture understanding that gynocentrism isn't just some silly made-up word by some MRA on the internet. It is a very real thing, and that it has served a very real purpose for over 3 million years of human history that was critical to us surviving as a species. But we find that once you don't need something for survival anymore, it becomes a liability instead of an asset. We do not need to run this culture purely on male sweat and blood anymore. We just don't have to do it. And the last thing I'm going to add, and this is about the women, is that the easiest way to find out if somebody really wants equality is to give it to them.
Well, yes. For example, female as well as male draft registration would be a good example of, of the fact that we don't even question that issue. When your son becomes 18 years of age, if he doesn't register for the draft, he's subject to $250,000 in fine, 5 years in prison. He's subject to never being able to go to a school that has federal aid, which is virtually every school, including private ones. He's subject to not being able to work for the post office or other federal agencies, and so he's basically considerably restricted in life. When our daughters turn 18, in order to have the privilege of freedom and to vote, they have to do
Warren, I think they just have to have a vagina. I'm pretty sure.
I knew there was something.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've been married too long. I forgot all about that.
And you talk about that, and it's real true. The blindness to the sexism of an all-male selective service, and that goes way back in the record too. What people won't consider every time I hear somebody scream about, well, my great-great-grandmother couldn't vote until 1920. Well, men historically, from the beginning of our voting rights in this country, had to pay for those rights with being subject to conscription. That was the contract between men and the government, that if you want to vote, you have to be ready to pick up arms and defend this country under orders and give your life if necessary.
And in fact, in 31 states, you cannot even get a driver's license if you are a male and haven't registered for the draft.
Really?
Exactly. And you lose your right to vote. You can lose your right to vote over it. And on the other hand, we have this crazy mythical narrative of women fighting for the right to vote. No. Women asked for the right to vote, and men said yes, and attached no commensurate responsibility with it at all.
Yes.
And so when I look at voting history, I don't see this how, well, man, men ran the world and they had the vote and women didn't. First of all, the gap between the average man having the vote and the average woman having the vote is not as wide as most people think. It isn't that much time on the historical record. And the other part of the equation is that women have never had to sacrifice for their rights.
Yes.
And that needs to change, and we need to have conversations about things like genital mutilation. We have to have conversations about things. The conference that we have coming up in October in Houston is titled Building Bridges Between Men and Women in the 21st Century. And we're very serious about that because the social contract has been disrupted and broken, and men need and women need to find a way to reconnect and to cooperate with each other. But it's my opinion anyway, and I think it's a pretty well considered opinion, is that can never happen in a culture that does not put gynocentrism on the table as a part of that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't include that, then we will never, ever achieve our goals.
Yes, I agree.
I think one of the ways of including that is by communicating to our leaders in ways that are in the few opportunities we really have to be effective when when their minds are flexible. And I hope that some people will consider coming to Iowa with us. And in July, and if you look at the White House Council on Boys and Men website, it'll give you all the details. And if you can come, is to be able to donate money to people who are too poor to be able to come themselves, and to be able to support this effort, because this is a once every 4 years and really once every 8 years, because very often presidents don't change except for every 8 years, where there's an openness to who might be the next president, and everybody is a possibility. And so at this early stage in the primary process, it's the only time when you can access candidates and have their ear. Once some of them get vetted out, the press are so involved in hovering around them that there's no longer an open space to get through to their ear.
Yeah, it's our chance to catch them in the corridor with the camera.
Yes, exactly.
Put them on the record.
Yes.
It's about time we finished up, gentlemen, you think?
Absolutely.
Are we getting there? Any last words?
I'm not snoring anymore or yawning.
Or shrugs?
I really enjoyed the talk. Yeah, I got something conference related to announce here, of course, to remind everybody, second International Conference on Men's Issues, October 29th and 30th of this year in Houston, Texas. Tickets are on sale now at aboysformen.com. Really interesting factor. In our early ticket sales, we have gone through and looked at the point of origin. 42% of the tickets sold so far have been from countries other than the United States.
Oh my God, that's fascinating.
Wow.
Yes, and that is well, it's fascinating, and we've done tried to. It prompted us to do some analysis about why that might have happened. I mean, after all, it is an international conference, and so we're very pleased to see. We have people coming from India, Australia, England, Canada. They're from around the world, just like last time. They're coming together to do this. But we also noticed, well, why is it? Because that did not match what happened last year. The numbers were quite different than that. And then it occurred to me that we started selling tickets 2 weeks before April 15th. And I don't know about you guys, but that was not a good time in my home, getting ready for taxes. And a lot of people have large tax bills. We had originally said we were going to cut off. We had an early bird discount. Because of that, we consider, well, maybe there's some people in America that didn't get their tickets yet because of tax time. So we've extended it another 30 days.
That's good.
To give them the opportunity. But
so explain this. The conference is in October, extending the tickets for early bird discounts. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yes. Well, the prices escalate the closer that we get. So we have a period where they're price X, and then after a certain date, and I don't have it all memorized, they're price Y, and then another date they're price Z, and they get progressively more expensive as you get toward the conference. Mm-hmm. We had only allowed a very short time after people had paid taxes to purchase tickets for Americans, and we thought that it might have had an influence. I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved seeing that number, 42% from other countries.
Yes,
that's great.
It was a wonderful feeling, but we feel like we might have caught some people in America at a rougher financial time, so we extended the first window of opportunity by 30 days to see if that would give them the opportunity to catch up financially.
Good idea.
Paul, in absolute numbers, how are the ticket sales doing compared to last time?
We're about dead even in absolute numbers, but there is also a lot more encouraging stuff going on. What people are going to find in this conference, one, they're going to be blown away. I mean, we had a fantastic conference in St. Clair Shores. The esprit de corps there, the sense of unity and community was there. People were walking around on clouds, and I remember seeing people say, "Oh my God, look at that! There's Warren Farrell, there's and Barbara Kay and Aaron Pitsey and Ann Cools, and oh my God!" And it was that kind of spirit and that kind of environment. But because of the difficulties we had with protesters and being forced to move the venue, we weren't in as nice a place as we wanted to be. And of course, that last-minute move cost a lot of money. Well, we learned our lessons, and we have prepared early for this. And we have a humdinger coming up. We have a beautiful facility.
Your home, right?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, just somebody will be sitting right behind me. We'll just do it all on the internet. No, beautiful facility. We will be live streaming the entire event from the beginning with much better equipment than we had last year. We have pipe and drape for the staging. Many other bonuses. Meals will be served throughout the conference. The conference will include, the conference ticket includes lunches for everybody there on both days, and they have the option to buy in at a very reasonably priced dinner on Friday night and Saturday night. There is so much going on. It's really been hectic and crazy and draining the staff. Of course, we're working ourselves to death on this, but this is going to be a very big step up in conference experience from last year. And we have a lot more supporters behind us behind the scenes, and everybody's pumped and ecstatic about what's going on with this.
Yep.
Fantastic.
It's going to be good. It's going to be great.
Yeah, it is. I can't wait. Looking forward to it.
And that's maybe a good note to stop on.
Yeah, I think it is.
Warren, did you have something you needed to add?
No, just I'm looking really forward to speaking at the conference with you guys and seeing you all again, and and you know, seeing what new energy and new direction we can take, and you know, building a really strong, caring, but firm movement that sort of confronts issues that have been half a century neglected.
Yeah.
We're not going to accept that anymore.
Yes.
It's just not acceptable to ignore this much pain anymore.
We're going to be real men.
And on that note.
And don't worry. Oh yeah, one other thing real quickly. My new book with Dr. Tara Palmatier is available for pre-sale. Say Goodbye to Crazy. You talk about being on message. Get a copy of Say Goodbye to Crazy. It's on pre-sale on Amazon right now, and it will be released on Mother's Day.
All right. Say Goodbye to Crazy on Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day. I got you a book.
Yeah.
Let's all keep in mind that men are good, and there is no I in MANstream. We'll see you. Good night.